Montana Territory, May 1882, the wind whipped dust across the rutted road as Frances Kellan stood on the edge of the freight yard in Miles City, skirts mudded, lips cracked from thirst, and her heart pounding in her throat. She had never begged for anything in her life until now. "I need to get west," she said, stepping into the path of a wagon drawn by two chestnut mares. "Please, I will work, I will help, I just please." The rider pulled the reins, slowing the team. He was tall in the seat, broad-shouldered, with a worn dust coat and dark hair curling at the collar. His face was shadowed by the brim of his hat, but his eyes, sharp and blue, met hers with caution, then something softer. "You traveling alone?" he asked, voice low but steady. "Yes," she swallowed hard. "I need to get to Helena. I can pay some. Not much, but I can work for the rest." He studied her stained hem, her trembling hands, her straight spine in spite of it all. "Name's Elias McCrae," he said finally, stepping down from the buckboard. "Wagons headed west. I haul freight and fence posts." "Not a passenger coach." "I do not care," she said. "I just need off this town's dirt. I cannot stay here." He glanced past her, toward the station yard where a man in a deputy's badge was talking with two other men, one of them holding a bloodied rag to his head. Elias's jaw tensed. "You running from something?" "No," she said quietly, "just trying to get to something else." He gave a slow nod. "All right then, there's space in the back. You ride quiet, help when needed, and do not slow me down." Relief flooded her eyes as she climbed into the back of the wagon, settling beside crates of barbed wire and sacks of grain. They rode in silence for miles, the only sounds the creak of wood, the jingle of tack, and the wind whispering through the grass. The sun began to dip low behind them, casting long shadows across the prairie. Elias pulled off the trail near a creek and set up camp. Frances moved to help without being asked, gathering kindling, fetching water. He watched her, not speaking but not stopping her either. "You from around here?" he asked as they ate beans and hard bread by the fire. "No, Illinois. My father had a shop. After he passed, there was nothing left for me." She stared into the flames. "I took a train as far as I could afford, then a man promised work in Miles City. He lied." Elias said nothing, but his hand tightened slightly around his tin cup. "You?" she asked, glancing at him, born near Abilene. "Been up here 2 years, I keep to myself." He met her gaze. "That usually works fine." She gave a small nod. "I will not be trouble." "I believe you," he said simply. That night she slept curled beneath a blanket on the far side of the fire. Elias sat up long after, watching the stars, his rifle across his knees. By the second day, she had learned to check the harnesses and hand him tools when he repaired a bolt. She sang softly to herself when she thought he could not hear. It stirred something in him he had long buried. Late on the third day, they passed a burned-out homestead. Frances stiffened as they rode by, eyes fixed on the charred remains of the cabin. "I had a sister," she said suddenly. "She married young, 2 children. She wrote me from Helena last winter, said she had a place for me if I could get there, but her last letter was months ago." Elias said nothing, but he slowed the horses a little, letting her have space with the silence. They camped that night beneath a stand of cottonwoods. She helped him unhitch the horses, her fingers raw but steady. "You ever drive a team before?" he asked. "No, but I am learning." He handed her the reins the next morning. She looked at him with wide eyes. "Keep them steady," he said. "Let them know you're the one in charge." Her hands trembled at first, but she kept the wagon straight. He watched her, one brow raised. "You catch on quick." Frances smiled for the first time since he had met her. "I have a good teacher." The days passed, and with each mile they began to talk more. He told her of his younger brother lost in the war, of the land he was saving for near the Bitterroots. She listened, not just with her ears, but with her whole being. She did not pity him. She simply understood. One night, after a long day of pushing through rain and muck, he built the fire while she sat nearby, arms wrapped around her knees. "You all right?" he asked. She lifted her face to him. "You did not have to stop for me back in Miles City." "I know," he looked at the flames, "but something told me I should." Her eyes searched his. "Why?" He met her gaze. "Because you were not supposed to be left behind." Frances blinked, her breath catching. She stood slowly and crossed to sit beside him. The firelight danced between them. "I am glad it was you," she whispered. He reached out, brushing a strand of damp hair from her cheek. His fingers lingered a moment too long. Her hand found his wrist, holding it there, neither moved away. They sat that way for a long time, the fire crackling, the world hushed except for the wind in the grass and the quiet thump of two hearts finding a rhythm. By the fifth day, Elias began to speak of what they would do once they reached Helena. He did not speak of her going on alone. He said and Frances felt her guard start to fall completely. But just past the bend in the road near a shallow ravine, they heard the sharp crack of a rifle. Elias threw the reins into her lap. "Drive, keep going." Frances did not hesitate. She lashed the reins and urged the horses forward. Elias stood at the back of the wagon, rifle raised. Two riders came out of the trees, bandits by the look of them. Frances clenched her jaw and kept the wagon steady, her fingers white on the reins. Elias fired once, then again. One rider dropped, the other turned and fled. When the road was quiet again, she pulled the wagon to a halt and jumped down. "You are hit," she said, seeing the blood on his arm. "It is nothing." "Sit," she ordered. Now, he stared at her but obeyed. She tore a strip from her underskirt and wrapped the wound tight. His eyes never left her face. "You saved us," she said, tying the knot. "I knew you would keep the horses steady." She looked up at him, her hand still on his arm. "You trusted me." "I do." They sat there in the middle of the road, the sun slowly setting behind them. He leaned forward, touching his forehead to hers. "I am not just giving you a ride anymore," he said quietly. Frances smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I know." And for the first time in years, she felt safe, not because of where she was, but because of who was beside her. The next morning broke cool and pale, a light frost silvering the low grass. Frances stirred first, stretching the stiffness from her legs as she stood, and moved quietly toward the creek with the battered tin basin. The water stung her hands, and she welcomed it. The cold cleared her head, steadied her breath. When she returned to camp, Elias was feeding the horses, his left arm bound in the cloth she'd tied the day before. He moved slower, favoring the wound, but didn't complain. He looked up when she approached and gave a short nod. "You sleep?" he asked. "Some," she said. "You?" He gave a shrug. "Enough." She crouched near the fire pit and began coaxing a flame from the embers, one hand shielding the match from the breeze. The silence between them felt different now, no longer unfamiliar, but something settled, like the hush that comes just before a bird lands on your outstretched hand. While the beans warmed over the fire, she glanced toward the wagon, then back to him. "Do you have anyone waiting?" she asked, not meeting his eyes. "No, never married," Elias said, brushing a twig from the horse's mane. "There was a girl once back in Kansas. She married someone else before I got back from the army." Frances stirred the pot slowly. "You still think of her?" "Sometimes. More the idea of her than the truth, I reckon." She nodded, her voice low. "It's strange how the people who leave can still take up space in us." Elias stepped closer, the horses behind him quiet now. "You left someone behind?" "No," she said, then hesitated. "There was a man who said he'd help me. He didn't. That's the last I'll say of him." He didn't press her. Instead, he sat down across from her, his expression unreadable but not unkind. They ate quietly, and after the dishes were cleaned and stowed, he handed her the reins again. The road west bent through a low valley, rimmed with cottonwoods just beginning to show green. They passed a wagon headed east, a family of 6, the mother holding a baby swaddled in a quilt, the father nodding as they passed. Frances watched them disappear behind the hill crest, her hand tightening slightly on the reins. "I used to imagine a house full of children," she said after a while. "A garden, laundry strung up in the sun, that kind of life." Elias adjusted his hat against the glare. "You still could," Frances turned to him. "Could you?" He didn't answer right away. "I've lived alone a long time, got used to it, but I wouldn't turn away something better." They reached a rise overlooking a wide plain, fields stretching out in gentle sway. Far in the distance, smoke rose from a stovepipe, just one. A homestead. Frances watched it as they passed. That night they stopped near a rocky bluff. The land sloped gently down to a stream where the horses could drink. Francis gathered moss from between the stones, drying it near the fire to use for tinder. Elias cleaned his rifle with slow, practiced hands. She sat next to him, close enough to feel the warmth from his shoulder. "You said once you were saving for land," she said. "You still plan to," he nodded. "Near the Bitterroots, there's a place with tall grass and water year-round. I've got most of what I need, just not all." She looked into the fire. "If I make it to Helena and find my sister, I'll find work. I could help with the rest." Elias didn't answer right away. He set the rifle down, then turned to her. "I didn't take you on to pull your weight, Francis." She looked up at him. "I know, but you've never treated me like I couldn't." He reached out, brushing a fleck of ash from her sleeve. His fingers lingered just a moment, enough for her to feel the weight of the gesture. Eventually, she stood, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I'll check the horses before sleep." "I already did," he said. "I'd still like to," she replied. He watched her go, and when she returned, she sat beside him again. This time closer. "I never thought I'd trust a man again," she said, voice steady. Elias turned to her slowly. "I didn't think I'd find someone who saw more than a man with a wagon and a past." She reached for his hand, and he let her take it. They didn't kiss, not yet, but when she lay down that night, it was with her hand still clasped in his. And while the wind moved through the grass and the stars wheeled overhead, they slept side by side, the fire between them burning low and steady. They crossed into the Judith Basin under a sky thick with cloud, the light soft and gray, the air damp enough to draw the scent of sage and wet earth from the hills. The wagon creaked beneath its load, wheels cutting narrow scars through the muddy trail. Elias had wrapped his arm tighter that morning, and though he said nothing, Francis noticed the way his shoulders pulled taut with each jostle. She didn't ask if he needed rest. He wouldn't take it if offered. Instead, she leaned forward, watching the trail ahead, alert to every rise and rut. "You ever been through here before?" she asked, voice quiet beside the steady clip of hooves. "Once," he said. "Late fall, snow came early, lost 2 mules and a wheel to the ice." She scanned the low ridges. "Looks peaceful now." "That's how the land fools you," he said. "It waits, watches. Then reminds you who's in charge." Francis nodded, not in fear but understanding. "It has a memory too, I think, of what it's taken and what it's given back." Elias glanced at her, then ahead again. "Most folk don't notice that. I notice more than I used to." They rode past a collapsed stage station near a bend in the creek. A rusted lantern still hung from the eave, swinging slightly in the wind. Francis watched it until it disappeared behind the trees. By midday, they stopped to rest the horses in a pocket of grass near a granite outcrop. Elias knelt by the water, rinsing his face, his fingers trembling just enough for her to notice. "This needs tending," she said, crouching beside him before he could deflect. His mouth tightened, but he didn't argue. He peeled back the bandage while she poured boiled water over a cloth. "Color's better than yesterday," she said, examining the wound. "Doesn't feel any better." "You're not built for stillness, are you?" He let out a breath, half a chuckle. "I've never been good at letting someone else do the hard part." She tied the fresh bandage firm, then sat beside him on the grass, knees drawn up, arms around them. Below them, the land rolled open, pale grass, scattered pine, a lone hawk circling high. "You think your sister's still in Helena?" Elias asked after a long silence. "I don't know," Francis said, "but I need to find out, even if I have to start again without her." He picked up a small stone, turned it in his hand. "You'd stay if she wasn't there, if I found something worth staying for." He didn't look at her. "You ever think about what you'd do if you didn't have to keep looking over your shoulder?" "I'd plant sunflowers," she said, "along a fence. Let them grow tall enough to catch the first light." Elias turned his gaze to the horizon. "That sounds like something." She stood then, brushing off her skirt. "Let's move while the sky holds. I don't trust those clouds." They were quiet again as they climbed back into the wagon. The trail narrowed, passing through a cut of dark fir and lichen-covered stone. Francis watched the trees, listening for the hush of wind through boughs, the distant crack of branch or hoof. "You ever miss the army?" she asked, glancing at his profile. "No," Elias said, "but I remember it." "Every day." She looked at him, then away. I think remembering and missing aren't the same thing, he nodded slowly. One keeps you looking back, the other just keeps you awake. They made camp early that evening, near a cluster of wind-worn boulders that shielded them from the worst of the gusts. Francis lit the fire while Elias spread the tarp and fed the horses. After they ate, they sat close, backs against the same flat stone, watching dusk stretch long over the basin. I used to think quiet meant loneliness, Francis said, her fingers idly tracing the edge of her shawl. Now it feels like something else. What does it feel like? Like being allowed to breathe? Elias leaned his head back, eyes closed. You've been holding your breath a long time. I think I forgot how not to. He reached for her hand, not sudden, not hesitant, just sure. She let him take it, their palms resting together between them. Would you come with me? He asked. She looked at him, brow furrowing slightly. When we reach Helena, he said, if your sister's gone, if there's no work, would you come with me to Bitterroot? I've got enough to start. A roof. A stove, fence to build, sunflowers, maybe. Francis didn't speak right away. The firelight flickered across his face, softening the lines there. She could feel the weight of him, not just his hand in hers, but all of him, offered without armor. I would, she said at last. But not because there's nowhere else to go, Elias turned to her. Why then? Because it's the first time I've been asked like I matter. He leaned in slowly, and she met him halfway. The kiss was quiet, no rush, no claim, just warmth and promise, steady as the land beneath them. When they pulled apart, Francis tucked herself into the space against his side, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulder. The fire crackled low. The wind swept gently through the grass beyond. Neither spoke again that night. They didn't need to. Tomorrow the road would bend again. But tonight they had found something steady, something real. And for the first time since she'd stepped into that dirt yard in Miles City, Francis let herself believe in the life waiting on the other side of the trail. The sky broke open the next morning, not with thunder, but a steady, soaking rain that began before dawn and showed no sign of letting up. Francis stood beneath the canvas flap of the wagon, arms crossed, watching the horses shift in the gray murk. Elias was already at their heads, checking hooves, his coat soaked through at the shoulders. We'll have to wait it out, she said, raising her voice above the patter. He didn't turn. Not here. She stepped out, boots sinking into the softening earth. Why not? This low ground's no good. We stay, we'll be up to the axle by noon. He tipped his hat back to look at her. There's a ridge 2 miles north. If we push, we can make it before the trail washes out. Francis climbed up into the wagon without another word and began shifting the crates, wedging them tighter against the rails. She didn't ask how he knew about the ridge. She trusted he did. The rain made the horses skittish, and the wheels dragged heavy, but they pressed forward, Elias walking beside the team, one hand steady on the lead's bridle. Francis guided from the seat, her jaw set, rain running down her neck. By the time they reached the rise, her back ached and her hands were blistered. She dropped down stiffly, helping Elias unhitch and lead the animals beneath the shelter of a rocky overhang. The firewood was damp, but he coaxed a flame from the driest pieces and shielded it with a bent sheet of tin. They warmed their hands in silence, the rain tapping steady on the stones above. He passed her a strip of dried venison. You ever camp in weather like this? She tore off a piece and shook her head. Once I slept in a train yard during a thunderstorm, thought the sky would tear itself wide open. This feels quieter. You learn to read the quiet, he said. Not all of it means safety. She watched the firelight flicker against the stone. I used to think every still moment was a warning. Like something was waiting just out of sight. What changed? I stopped waiting for the worst thing to happen, started listening for the better one. Elias leaned back, legs stretched toward the heat. What do you hear now? She looked at him, not away, not shy. You. He held her gaze, then reached down, unlatched the pouch at his side, and pulled out a folded slip of paper. He handed it to her without speaking. She unfolded it carefully. The ink was faded, the handwriting firm but unadorned. A deed. 160 acres near the western slope of the Bitterroots, his name printed at the top. This is real, she said softly. It is. He paused. Been saving the last payment for over a year. Got a man holding it for me in Missoula. I was waiting to file until I knew I wouldn't be building it alone. She looked up sharply. You weren't going to ask. I was, but not until I knew if you wanted your own place instead. Frances set the paper on her lap, fingers resting lightly at its edge. I've had land offered before. Nothing ever came with a name on it, just promises that changed when I took the first step through the door. Elias shifted beside her, his hands rough and still. You'll have your own name on it too, if you want it. She folded the deed carefully and handed it back. I don't want to share because I'm passing through. I want to stay because I choose to. That's different. He didn't press her. Just tucked the paper back into his saddlebag and stirred the fire higher. They sat that way for a long while, the heat slowly pushing the chill from their clothes. Later, as the rain slackened, Frances stepped out beneath the overhang. The clouds had begun to thin, letting a soft, golden light spill through in patches. She turned her face up to it, letting the warmth find her cheeks. Elias joined her, close but not touching. We'll ride into Helena tomorrow. Should reach it by dusk, she nodded. I'll go to the station house, ask after my sister. If her name's not on any rolls, I'll know. He looked toward the horizon. If she's there and wants you to stay, Frances exhaled slowly. Then I'll tell her I've found something I didn't know I was looking for. A flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes, but he said nothing. That night, with the storm past and the fire burning clean, they lay side by side beneath the wagon canvas. Elias's injured arm rested across his chest, and Frances curled beneath the blanket, close enough to feel the steady rise and fall of his breath. Tell me something I don't know, she whispered. He closed his eyes for a long moment. When I was 19, I almost married a girl in Abilene. She had a laugh that'd pull a man across a river without a rope. What happened? Her father sold his land. They moved east. I stayed, never heard from her again. Frances pressed her forehead to his shoulder. She missed something good. Elias turned his head toward her. So did I. But I'm not missing this. She reached up, brushed her fingers along his jaw, then leaned in to kiss him. No hesitation, no fear, just truth. When she drew back, he rested his hand gently at her waist, thumb tracing the fabric of her blouse. You sure? He asked, voice low. I've never been more. And there, beneath the stars that had finally pushed through the cloud break, they gave themselves to something neither of them had planned for but both had earned slowly, surely, with nothing left hidden. By the time sleep took them, the fire had burned down to coals, and the night was full of the quiet promise of morning. The road into Helena was packed hard from wagon wheels and recent rain, the sky washed clean and pale above the town's low sprawl. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the sound of hammering echoed faintly along the outskirts where new homes crept toward the wooded hills. Elias kept the team steady, guiding the wagon past storefronts with painted signs and women hanging laundry from second-story porches. Frances sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, eyes scanning every face they passed. They stopped in front of the station house near the courthouse square, where the wooden sidewalk had been swept clean and the windows stood open to the breeze. Frances climbed down first. Elias stepped down after her but didn't follow her inside. He simply touched her elbow and said, "I'll be here." Inside, a man in a gray waistcoat looked up from a tall desk as she entered. His mustache was neatly trimmed, and he had the air of someone who knew how to manage both paperwork and people in equal measure. "I'm looking for someone," Frances said. "Her name's Clara Wren. She came through sometime last winter, mid-20s. 2 young children, one a girl with a birthmark on her cheek." He flipped slowly through a ledger, finger-tracing lines. "We keep records on boarding houses and train receipts. Wren, you said?" "Yes, Clara Wren. She would have come from Illinois." He turned a few more pages, then paused. There was a Clara Wren registered at the Florence house. Checked in mid-February, left again 6 days later. Frances's breath caught. "Did she leave a forwarding address?" The man shook his head. "Only note says she was headed north toward Flathead country. A family was traveling through and offered her work. Might have gone with them." Frances pressed her fingers to her mouth, nodding slowly. "Thank you." Back outside, she stepped onto the boardwalk. Elias was leaning against the wagon, one boot crossed over the other, watching a boy across the street toss stones at post. He looked up when he heard her footsteps. "She was here," Frances said, "but she's gone now." He studied her face. You all right? I think so. You want to try and find her? She shook her head. No, she made her choice and I've made mine. He didn't ask what that meant. She didn't need to explain. They left town by late afternoon, heading south along the river road. The trail was quiet, the air warm with the scent of pine and damp soil. Frances leaned against Elias's shoulder as they rode, her eyes half closed. I never asked what you'll do with the land, she said. Besides the sunflowers, fence pasture, build a barn. Maybe plant hay come spring, she smiled. And a kitchen garden, if you want one. I do. I've never had a piece of earth that was mine, not really. You will. They reached the valley by the end of the third day. The land opened wide beneath the mountain's edge, green and gold in the late light. The creek ran cold and clear along the southern edge, and cottonwoods lined its bank. At the center rose a low hill topped with a handful of pines and a scatter of stones. Elias stopped the wagon there and climbed down. Frances followed, standing beside him as he looked out over the land. I buried my brother over that ridge, he said, pointing west. He followed me out here after the war, didn't last long, fever took him. She took his hand. This place mattered to him, it did. It does. They camped near the creek that night. Elias laid out his plans in the dirt with a stick. The cabin here facing east, the pasture fence running north to south, the smokehouse near the slope. Frances listened, asking questions, offering thoughts. When he paused, she took the stick and drew a square behind the cabin. What's that? Elias asked. Chicken coop. He grinned. You planning to do the building? I'll hold the hammer while you set the nails. They started work the next morning. Elias dug post holes while Frances hauled timber from the wagon. He cut the frame for the cabin by hand, his injured arm slower but steady. She soaked beans in the evenings, cooked over open fire, and stitched panels for the window cloth. Days turned to weeks. The cabin walls rose. The door was hung. A stovepipe was fitted through the roof. They slept inside the first night. The roof held out the rain, a thin mattress on pine boards, her head resting on his shoulder, his hand curved around her hip. In town, they filed the deed with both names. The clerk raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Elias signed first, then handed her the pen. She wrote her name slowly, carefully, and when it was done, she looked up at him and smiled, a smile not of relief, but of belonging. The garden bed was dug by early August. Frances planted seeds she traded for in town, squash, beans, and late cabbage. Elias split rails for the fence, and when it was done, she hammered in the final nail. They married beneath the cottonwoods, just the two of them, with the priest from St. Mary's riding out on horseback and blessing the ground with his hat in hand. Frances wore a linen dress she'd hemmed herself. Elias wore his cleanest shirt and combed his hair back with river water. They spoke no vows beyond what was asked, but when the priest left, they stood in the field a long while, arms around each other, the wind tugging gently at their sleeves. That night they danced barefoot in the grass, the lantern swinging gently from the porch beam. He held her close, humming a tune she didn't know, and she laid her head against his chest, listening. Years passed. The cabin grew into a home. The garden stretched wider. A cradle was built and then filled. Their daughter had Elias's eyes and Frances's quietness and loved the smell of fresh churned butter more than any toy. They marked time by the changing trees, the calves born each spring, the first frost on the windows. They never left the valley. Never needed to, and Frances never looked back, because love, when it's earned through silence and sweat and the sharing of every long mile, does not ask for more than presence and gives back more than anyone ever thinks to ask for.